Chapter 7. A Thick Fog. That little piece of paper which was given me that day, I have it still, put among my greatest treasures. There was not much written on it, only 2 lines of a hymn. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. I walked slowly up to the house thinking. My grandfather was out with Jem Miller, so I did not show him the paper then, but I read the lines many times over as I was playing with little Timpey, and I wondered very much what they meant. In the evening my grandfather and Jem Miller generally sat together over the fire in the little watchroom upstairs, and I used to take little Timpey there until it was time for her to go to bed. She liked climbing up the stone steps in the lighthouse tower. She used to call out, "Up, up, up," as she went along until she reached the top step, and then she would run into the watchroom with a merry laugh. As we went in this evening, my grandfather and Jem were talking together of the visit of the 2 gentlemen. "I can't think what the old man meant about the rock," my grandfather was saying. "I couldn't make head or tail of it, Jem, could you, my lad?" "Look there, grandfather," I said, as I handed him the little piece of paper, and told him how I had got it. "Well, to be sure," said my grandfather. "So he gave you this, did he?" And he read aloud, "On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand." "Well now, Jem, what does he mean? He kept on saying to me, 'You're on the sand, my friend, you're on the sand, and it won't stand the storm.' What do you make of it, Jem? Did you hear him, my lad?" "Yes," said Jem thoughtfully, "and it has set me thinking, Sandy. I know what he meant well enough." "And pray what may that be?" "He meant we can't get to heaven except we come to Christ. We can't get no other way. That's just what it means, Sandy." "Do you mean to tell me," said my grandfather, "that I shan't get to heaven if I do my best?" "No, it won't do, Sandy. There's only one way to heaven. I know that well enough." "Dear me, Jem," said my grandfather, "I never heard you talk like that before." "No," said Jem, "I forgot all about it since I came to the island. I had a good mother years ago. I ought to have done better than I have done." He said no more, but he was very silent all the evening. My grandfather and Jem took it in turns, the last Friday every month. It was the only time they were allowed to leave the island. When it was my grandfather's turn, I generally went with him, and much enjoyed getting a little change. But whichever of them went, it was a great day with us on the island, for they brought any little things that we might be needing for our houses or gardens, and did any business that had to be done on shore. We all went down to the pier to see Jem Miller start, and as I was helping him to get on board some empty sacks and some other things he had to take with him, he said to me in an undertone, "Alec, my lad, keep that bit of paper. It's all true what the old gentleman said. I've been thinking of it ever since, and Alec," he whispered, "I believe I am on the rock now." He said no more, but arranged his oars, and in a minute more he was off. But as he rowed away, I heard him singing softly to himself, "On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand." We watched the boat out of sight, and then went home, wishing that it was evening, and that Jem was back again with all the things that we had asked him to get for us. That was a very gloomy afternoon. A thick fog came over the sea and gradually closed us in, so that we could hardly see a step before us on the beach. Little Timpey began to cough, so I took her indoors and amused her there with a picture book. It grew so dark that my grandfather lighted the lighthouse lamp soon after dinner. There was a dull yellow light over everything. I never remember a more gloomy afternoon, and as evening came on the fog grew denser, till at length we could see nothing outside the windows. It was no use looking out for Jem's return, for we could not see the sea, much less any boat upon it. So we stayed indoors, and my grandfather sat by the fire smoking his pipe. "I thought Jem would have been here before now," he said at length, as I was putting out the cups and saucers for tea. "Oh, he'll come before we've finished tea, I think, grandfather," I answered. "I wonder what sort of a spade he'll have got for us." When tea was over, the door opened suddenly, and we looked up, expecting to see Jem enter with our purchases. But it was not Jem, it was his wife. "Sandy," she said, "what time do you make it? My clock stopped." 20 minutes past 6, said my grandfather, looking at his watch. "Past 6," she repeated. "Why, Jem's very late." "Yes," said my grandfather. "I'll go down to the pier and have a look out." But he came back soon, saying it was impossible to see anything, the fog was so thick, he was almost afraid of walking over the pier. "But he's bound to be in at 7, he said," for that was the hour the lighthouse men were required to be on the island again, "so he'll soon be up now." The clock moved on, and still Jem Miller did not come. I saw Mrs. Miller running to her door every now and then, with her baby in her arms, to look down the garden path, but no one came. At last the clock struck 7. "I never knew him to do such a thing before," said my grandfather, as he rose to go down to the pier once more. End of chapter 7.